I stood there in front of my mother's casket, wearing the plain black dress I'd borrowed last minute, clutching the folded obituary in one hand and my breath in the other. The church was silent, or it had been, right until my father, Charles Monroe, took the microphone near the pulpit. In a voice loud enough to drown out the organ and the mourning, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Let's not pretend. Rachel isn't my real daughter. Margaret raised her out of pity, not blood. My wife Patricia and I, we only have one child. That's Madison. She's my daughter, the only one who carries the Monroe name right." The room gasped. Forks stopped mid-air at the repast. Some people whispered, some looked away, but no one stood up for me. I was humiliated, erased from my own family, at my, mother's funeral. But that moment wasn't the worst of it. That came 5 minutes later, when Madison, the golden girl, the one he claimed as his only real daughter, opened the sealed envelope I'd taken from Grandma Margaret's nightstand, the one she'd made me promise not to read until after Mom was gone. She scanned the words, her smile faltering. Then her face went white. Her hands trembled. And, in front of everyone, Madison screamed, "No, no, this isn't possible. It's her. She's the one." That's when everything changed. The rain was falling softly in Savannah when I woke up that morning, the day I'd bury my mother. The droplets against the window sounded like tiny fingernails tapping, trying to get my attention. I imagined it was Mom, somehow still reaching out, still trying to comfort me, even though she was gone. I'd slept in my childhood bedroom, in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, because Mom had always insisted on hanging them to dry in the garden where her lavender bushes grew tall and wild. The familiar scent made her absence even more unbearable. "Rachel?" Aunt Beth's voice came through the door, gentle but insistent. "We need to leave in an hour, honey." I sat up, my eyes raw from crying myself to sleep. "I'll be ready." The black dress I'd borrowed from my cousin hung on the closet door, a simple, modest thing. Nothing like what Madison would wear. But then again, I'd never been anything like Madison. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my hair, Mom's hair, everyone always said, hung limp around my shoulders. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman hollowed out by grief. My phone buzzed. "Dad, remember to be at the church by 9. Patricia has arranged everything. Don't be late." "No, how are you holding up?" "No, I'm sorry for our loss. Just instructions, as always." As if I were some distant acquaintance who needed reminding about proper funeral etiquette. I texted back a simple, "Okay," and put the phone down. Downstairs, Aunt Beth had made coffee. She handed me a mug without asking and squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud of how you're handling this," she said quietly. Grandma Margaret. The thought of her made me reach for the envelope I'd kept with me since finding it in her nightstand. I'd discovered it while cleaning out her things after she passed, just 6 weeks before Mom. The envelope was sealed, with my name written in her elegant cursive, followed by the words, "For after Evelyn's funeral." I'd been carrying it ever since, unable to open it, afraid of what final words my grandmother might have left me. Now it sat in my purse, heavy with possibility. "Did you know?" I asked Aunt Beth suddenly. "About Grandma's letter to me?" Beth's eyes flickered with something. Knowledge, maybe, or caution. "Margaret had her reasons for everything she did," she said carefully. "Your grandmother was the wisest woman I've ever known." It wasn't really an answer, but before I could press her, the doorbell rang. It was Madison. She stood on the porch in a designer black dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, her blonde hair perfectly arranged, under a small, tasteful hat with a short veil. She looked like she'd stepped out of a funeral fashion magazine, if such a thing existed. "Rachel," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of superiority that always made me feel small. "Dad sent me to pick you up." I blinked. "I'm going with Aunt Beth." Madison's perfect eyebrows arched. "Dad insisted. It's important that we arrive as a family." She emphasized the word family in a way that made it sound like a club I wasn't quite qualified to join. Before I could respond, Aunt Beth appeared behind me. "Good morning, Madison," she said coolly. "How thoughtful of your father to send you, but Rachel will be riding with me. We have some things to discuss before the service." Madison's smile tightened. "Fine. I'll let Dad know." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rachel? Dad wants you to sit in the second row. Patricia's arranged the seating. The second row. Not with immediate family." I felt the slight like a physical blow, but nodded. After she left, I turned to Beth. The second row? Beth's face darkened. Charles always was a coward. Come on, let's get ready. The church was already half full when we arrived. St. Joseph's had been Mom's church since childhood, the same place where she'd married my father 30 years ago, the same place where she'd baptized me. I saw him immediately, Dad, standing tall and distinguished in an expensive black suit, his arm around Patricia's waist. Madison stood beside them, the perfect picture of a grieving stepdaughter. They were greeting people at the door, accepting condolences like royalty receiving subjects. I tried to slip past them, but Dad caught my arm. Rachel, he said, his voice formal. You're late. I'm 20 minutes early, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. Patricia gave me a quick air kiss near my cheek. Your mother would have wanted everything to be perfect, she said, managing to make it sound like a criticism of me. I looked at the three of them, Dad, Patricia, Madison, all perfectly coordinated in their grief, all looking at me like I was an inconvenience rather than a daughter who had just lost her mother. I need to find my seat, I said, pulling away from Dad's grip. Second row, left side, Madison reminded me helpfully. I walked into the church, feeling their eyes on my back. I found the pew where Aunt Beth was already seated and slid in beside her. Charles is making a spectacle of himself, she whispered. I looked back toward the entrance. My father was now embracing an elderly couple I didn't recognize, Patricia dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The perfect grieving family. Except I wasn't included. The organist began to play and people took their seats. I watched as Dad, Patricia, and Madison made their way to the front row, the family row, while I sat behind them, separate, apart. Mom's casket sat at the front of the church, surrounded by white lilies, her favorite. I couldn't take my eyes off it, couldn't process that she was really inside, that I would never hear her laugh again, never feel her hand smoothing my hair when I was upset. The service began. The pastor spoke of Mom's kindness, her faith, her love for her family. Then came the eulogy, delivered not by me, her daughter, but by my father. He stood at the pulpit, composed and dignified in his grief. Evelyn was the love of my life, he began, and I felt a surge of anger. The love of his life? He'd remarried barely a year after her death. I clutched the program so tightly it crumpled in my hands. Beside me, Aunt Beth placed her hand over mine, steadying me. Dad continued his perfectly crafted speech, talking about Mom's virtues, about their life together, about the daughter they had raised, Madison. I felt the blood drain from my face. Madison? Not me? And then he looked directly at me, his eyes cold, and spoke the words that would change everything. Let's not pretend. Rachel isn't my real daughter. Margaret raised her out of pity, not blood. My wife Patricia and I, we only have one child. That's Madison. She's my daughter, the only one who carries the Monroe name right. The silence that followed my father's words was absolute. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the church. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even feel my hands gripping the pew in front of me. Then the whispers started. Like a wave gathering strength, they rose around me, swelling into a hum of shock and speculation. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, staring, judging, pitying. Beside me, Aunt Beth inhaled sharply. That bastard, she hissed under her breath. She started to rise, fury etched in the lines of her face, but I caught her wrist. Don't, I whispered. Not here, not now. My father continued speaking as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my mother's funeral, as if he hadn't just publicly disowned me in front of everyone we knew. His voice droned on about Mom's legacy, about family values, about truth. Truth. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and mocking. I watched Madison's shoulders stiffen. She turned slightly, glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Triumph, maybe, or confusion. Patricia, on the other hand, wore a small, satisfied smile. She'd won. Whatever game she'd been playing since marrying my father, she'd finally won. The pastor, clearly uncomfortable, tried to regain control of the service. Let us pray, he said, his voice slightly higher than normal. I didn't bow my head. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself reaching into my purse, my fingers closing around Grandma Margaret's envelope. The paper felt warm, alive almost, as if it contained not just words but some essential truth that had been waiting for this exact moment. For after Evelyn's funeral, she'd written, Well, it didn't get more after than this. When the prayer ended, the pastor invited people to come forward and share their memories of Mom. I stood up, the envelope clutched in my hand. Rachel, Aunt Beth whispered urgently. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I walked to the front of the church, aware of every eye following me, every whispered comment, every shocked face. I stepped up to the pulpit where my father had just stood. I placed Grandma's envelope on the wooden surface. My mother, I began, my voice surprisingly clear, taught me that dignity matters more than pride, that truth matters more than appearances, and that love, real love, doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. I looked directly at my father, who was staring at me with a mixture of anger and alarm. I've carried something with me for 6 weeks, I continued. A letter from Grandma Margaret, your mother, Dad. She left it for me with specific instructions not to open it until after Mom's funeral. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Madison's eyes widened. I haven't read it, I said. I don't know what it says, but Grandma Margaret never lied. Not to me. Not to anyone. I picked up the envelope and walked down the steps, stopping directly in front of Madison. You're so certain of your place in this family, I said, quietly. So certain of who belongs and who doesn't. Maybe you should be the one to read it. I held out the envelope. Madison stared at it as if it might bite her. Then, with a glance at my father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, she took it. Go ahead, I said. Read it. Out loud. Madison looked around at the gathered mourners, all watching with undisguised curiosity. She seemed to collect, herself, straightening her shoulders and assuming an expression of cool confidence. With manicured fingers, she broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. She began to read, her voice clear and poised. My dearest Rachel. Madison faltered slightly, then continued, By the time you read this, both your mother and I will be gone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry to leave you alone. With what's to come. Madison paused, her eyes scanning ahead. Her face, perfectly composed just moments ago, began to change. Color drained from her cheeks. Her hands started to tremble. There are things you need to know, she continued, her voice now barely audible. Things about your father, about your place in this family, things I've kept silent about for too long. Madison stopped. Reading. She looked up at me, then at my father, horror dawning in her eyes. Keep reading, I said quietly. She shook her head, the letter trembling in her hands. Madison, my father said sharply. That's enough. But Madison wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the letter, her eyes moving rapidly across the page, absorbing whatever shocking truth Grandma Margaret had preserved. No, she whispered. No, this isn't possible. She looked up at me, then back at the letter, then at my father. Dad, is this true? My father stood up, his face ashen. Madison, give me that letter. It says... Madison's voice broke. She took a deep breath, then nearly shouted, It says Rachel is your biological daughter. It says I was adopted when you married Mom. The church erupted. People stood up, craning their necks to see better. Patricia grabbed for the letter, but Madison pulled away, backing up against the pulpit. It's all here, she continued, her voice rising. Adoption dates, court records, everything. Grandma kept copies of everything. She turned to me, her eyes wide with shock and something else. Guilt, maybe, or shame. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. The look on her face was too raw, too genuine for deception. My father pushed past Patricia, reaching for the letter. This is absurd, he sputtered. My mother was confused in her final days. That letter means nothing. But Madison wasn't listening to him anymore. She was reading again, her voice gaining strength. Charles adopted Madison when he married Patricia. It was a condition of their marriage. Patricia wanted security for her daughter, which is understandable. What isn't understandable is how he gradually pushed Rachel aside to make room for his new family. Enough! My father roared, finally reaching Madison and snatching the letter from her hands. But it was too late. The truth was out. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built, the one where I was the outsider, the one where Madison was his only real daughter, had crumbled in an instant. I stood there in the silence that followed, feeling strangely calm. The storm that had been building inside me for years had finally broken, and in its wake was a strange, peaceful clarity. I think, I said quietly, looking at my father, it's time for us to say goodbye to Mom. That's why we're here after all. The remainder of the funeral passed in a blur. I vaguely remember the pastor hurriedly concluding the service, people filing past Mom's casket, and then the procession to the cemetery. I rode with Aunt Beth, neither of us speaking much. What was there to say after such a public explosion of truth? At the graveside, I stood apart from my father and his real family. Patricia kept her arm locked possessively through his, her face a mask of controlled fury. Madison stood on his other side, pale and silent, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture, as if Savannah itself was holding its breath. As they lowered Mom's casket into the ground, I felt a strange sense of finality that had nothing to do with her death. Something else was ending today. The lies, the pretense, the careful fiction my father had constructed. When it was over, people drifted toward their cars, many avoiding eye contact with me or my father. The scandal had overshadowed Mom's farewell, and for that I felt a sharp pang of guilt. "It's not your fault," Aunt Beth said, as if reading my thoughts. "Margaret would have wanted the truth out. So would Evelyn." I nodded, my throat tight. "I should have read the letter before giving it to Madison." "Maybe," Beth conceded. "But then you wouldn't have seen their true reactions. Sometimes the way people respond to truth tells you everything you need to know about them." As we turned to leave, I heard my name being called. I turned to see Madison hurrying toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. "Rachel, wait," she said, slightly out of breath. "Please, can we talk?" Aunt Beth gave me a questioning look. "I'll wait in the car," she said, squeezing my arm before walking away. Madison and I stood facing each other, two women connected by a man who had lied to both of us. Up close, I could see that her careful makeup couldn't hide the redness around her eyes or the pallor beneath her foundation. "I didn't know," she said again, her voice small, "about being adopted, about you being, about any of it." "I believe you," I said simply. She looked surprised. "You do? Your reaction wasn't faked. Neither was mine. We've both been lied to, Madison." She nodded, twisting her hands together. "All these years, the way Dad treated you, I thought—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "You thought I was the unwanted stepchild he was stuck with," I finished for her. "I thought so too. I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked past her to where my father and Patricia were getting into their luxury sedan, neither of them looking in our direction. "Did they know you came to talk to me?" Madison shook her head. "They're furious. With Grandma Margaret, with you, with everyone. Dad tore up the letter after he took it from me." I felt a flash of anger. "Of course he did. But," Madison added, reaching into her purse, "I took pictures of it with my phone first. Every page." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then handed it to me. "You should have these. They're yours." I took the phone, my hand trembling slightly. There on the screen was the first page of Grandma's letter, her familiar handwriting clear and strong. I swiped through the images, 5 pages in all, my eyes catching phrases here and there, dates, legal terms, and love. So much love in those words. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This means thank you. Can I—" Madison hesitated. "Can I send them to you? What's your number?" I gave her my number, and she quickly sent the photos to my phone. When I got the notification, I handed her phone back to her. For a moment, we stood in awkward silence. "What happens now?" she finally asked. It was a question I'd been asking myself since the moment my father had denounced me in church. What did happen now? Did I fight for my place in a family that had never really wanted me? Did I walk away and start fresh? Did I try to forge some new relationship with Madison, this woman who had been both my rival and my replacement for so long? "I don't know," I admitted. "I need some time to process everything." Madison nodded. "I understand. I think I do too." She glanced back toward the parking lot. "They're waiting for me." "You should go," I said. She started to turn away, then hesitated. "Rachel, for what it's worth, I always wondered why Dad treated us so differently. I never thought it was fair." With that, she walked away, her slim figure growing smaller as she moved toward the waiting car. I watched until they drove away, my father never once looking back. That night, I sat alone in my mother's kitchen, Grandma Margaret's. Letter spread out before me. I'd read it 3 times now, absorbing every word, every revelation. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than I'd imagined. My father had indeed married Patricia when I was just over a year old, after my birth mother died. As part of their marriage agreement, he'd legally adopted Madison, who was 3 at the time. Patricia, ambitious and status-conscious, had gradually pushed me aside, positioning Madison as the true Monroe heir. Grandma Margaret had tried to intervene, eventually taking me in when I was 7, raising me as her own while my father and Patricia created their perfect family image with Madison. The official story became that I was staying with Grandma temporarily, but that temporary arrangement became my childhood. What the letter revealed that I hadn't known was that my father had allowed this arrangement partly out of guilt, because I reminded him too much of my birth mother, a woman he had truly loved but lost, and partly out of cowardice, because Patricia had made it clear that her acceptance of me would always be conditional and limited. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was nearly midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour? I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. My father stood on the porch, alone, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. For a long moment, I considered not answering. What could he possibly say that would matter now? But something, curiosity perhaps, or that persistent childhood hope for a father's love, made me open the door. "Rachel," he said, his voice hoarse. "May I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him to enter the house that had been my mother's, the house where I'd grown up with Grandma Margaret while he lived across town in his mansion with his real family. He looked around the modest living room, his eyes lingering on the family photos on the mantel, photos from which he was conspicuously absent. "I suppose you hate me," he said finally. "I don't hate you," I replied, surprised to find it was true. "I don't understand you. I don't respect you, but I don't hate you." He nodded, accepting this. "I deserved that." "You deserved worse," I said, my voice steady. "What you did today, at Mom's funeral of all places, was unforgivable," he finished. "I know. Then why are you here?" He sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Madison showed me the pictures she took of your grandmother's letter. She's devastated, Rachel. She had no idea she was adopted. And that's what concerns you?" I asked incredulously. "Madison's feelings? What about what you did to me for 28 years? What about—" "I'm not here to defend myself," he interrupted. "I can't. What I did was wrong. All of it." I crossed my arms, waiting. This man, this stranger who was my father, had never admitted being wrong about anything in my entire life. "Your grandmother," he continued, "she tried to tell me, so many times, that I was making a terrible mistake, that I would regret pushing you away. I didn't listen." He looked down at his hands. "I was a coward, Rachel. Patricia, she gave me an ultimatum early on. Either Madison became my priority, or she would leave and take half of everything I had. So you chose your money over your daughter," I said flatly. "I chose wrong," he admitted. "And then I kept choosing wrong, year after year, until the lie became easier than the truth." My father's unexpected confession hung in the air between us, like the scent of Mom's lavender that still lingered in the curtains. I didn't know what to say. For years, decades, I'd imagined this moment, imagined him acknowledging what he'd done. But now that it was happening, I felt strangely empty. "Why now?" I finally asked. "After all these years, why admit it now?" He moved to the sofa and sat down heavily, uninvited. "Because Margaret knew it would come. To this. She knew I would eventually go too far." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "She was always smarter than me, always knew people better than I did." I remained standing, unwilling to sit beside him, to pretend this was a normal conversation between father and daughter. "That doesn't answer my question." "Madison is packing her things," he said abruptly. "She's leaving the house. Says she can't look at me or Patricia right now." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Everything's falling apart, Rachel." So that was it. His carefully constructed life was crumbling, and he'd come to me. Why? For absolution? For help in fixing what he'd broken? The audacity was breathtaking. "And that's my problem how, exactly?" I asked coldly. "It's not," he admitted. "None of this is your problem. It's mine. I created it." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, needing a moment away from him. When I returned, he was staring at a photo on the end table. Me at my college graduation, Grandma Margaret beaming beside me. He'd been invited to the ceremony. He hadn't come. "What do you want from me?" I asked, setting my glass down with a sharp click. I don't know, he said, and for once, I believed him. To apologize, I suppose. Though I know that's not enough. It could never be enough. No, I agreed. It couldn't. He nodded, accepting this. Your grandmother left you everything, you know. This house, her savings, even some stock in my company that she'd held on to all these years. He smiled faintly. She was preparing for this day, making sure you'd be taken care of when everything came out. I hadn't known this. In the chaos following Mom's death so soon after Grandma's, I hadn't even thought about wills or inheritances. She didn't have to do that, I said quietly. I never wanted anything from this family except to be acknowledged, to belong. My father flinched as if I'd struck him. I know, he whispered. That was the one thing I couldn't give you, or wouldn't. We sat in silence for a long moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner marking the passage of time. I thought about all the birthdays he'd missed, the school events he'd skipped, the holidays where I'd been an afterthought. I thought about Grandma Margaret, steadfast and loving, filling those gaps as best she could. Patricia and I are separating, he said suddenly. After today, there's no coming back from this. I looked at him sharply. Are you expecting sympathy? No, he said, just telling you how things stand. Another silence fell. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the curtains. Madison wants to meet with you, he said after a while. To talk properly, she has questions. About her adoption. About you. About a lot of things. I considered this. Madison and I had never been close. How could we be, given the circumstances? But today, in that moment at the graveyard, I'd seen something in her I'd never noticed before. Vulnerability. Humanity. I'll think about it, I said. My father nodded, seemingly relieved that I hadn't outright refused. He stood up, straightening his jacket, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn leather box and held it out to me. This was your mother's, your birth mother's. Margaret kept it all these years. She gave it to me before she died, told me I should be the one to give it to you. I couldn't bring myself to do it then, but I'm giving it to you now. I took the box, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a delicate gold locket, heart-shaped and engraved with flowing vines. I clicked it open to find a tiny photograph of a young woman with my eyes, my smile. Her name was Eliza, my father said softly. She loved you more than anything in the world. I closed my hand around the locket, a wave of emotion washing over me. Grief for the mother I'd never known, gratitude to Grandma Margaret for preserving this connection, and something like pity for the broken man standing before me. Thank you for this, I said, my voice barely audible. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I don't expect forgiveness, Rachel. I don't deserve it, but I am sorry, truly sorry. And then he was gone, the door closing, behind him with a soft click. I sat in the quiet house, holding my birth mother's locket, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. My world had been turned upside down, the narrative of my life rewritten in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. The next morning, I woke to a text from Madison. Can we meet for coffee? Just you and me. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Magnolia Cafe, 11 a.m. The Magnolia was neutral territory, not associated with either side of the family. I arrived early, choosing a table in the back corner where we wouldn't be easily overheard. Savannah was a small city, and yesterday's drama was undoubtedly already making the rounds. Madison arrived precisely at 11, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, a stark contrast to her funeral attire. Without the perfect makeup and styled hair, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. A waitress came to take our orders. Black coffee for me, a latte for Madison. When she left, the awkward silence returned. I left the house, Madison said finally. I'm staying with a friend right now. Dad mentioned you might, I replied. He came to see me last night. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. He did? What did he say? That he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake. I shrugged. That he and Patricia are separating. Madison nodded, looking down at her hands. They had a huge fight after we got home from the funeral. I've never Seen them like that before. Patricia kept saying he'd ruined everything, that Grandma Margaret had destroyed everything she'd worked for. She looked up at me. It was like I was seeing them clearly for the first time. The waitress brought our coffees, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, gathering my thoughts. I never knew I was adopted, Madison continued, her voice low. All my life, they told me I was a Monroe, that I was special, that I belonged. She gave a bitter laugh. And all that time they were pushing you out. The actual Monroe daughter. We were both lied to, I said, echoing my words from the cemetery. For different reasons, maybe, but lied to all the same. Madison sipped her latte, leaving a foam mustache that she quickly wiped away. I've been thinking about it all night, she said. About how they treated you. About how I treated you. She met my eyes directly. I was awful to you, Rachel. I was smug and superior and just awful. You were a child, I said. We both were. And you were acting on what you'd been told. That doesn't make it right. No, I agreed. It doesn't, but it makes it understandable. Madison and I sat in the Magnolia Cafe for nearly 3 hours that morning, gradually unraveling the tangled web of lies that had shaped both our lives. As we talked, I began to see her not as the privileged real daughter who had everything I'd been denied, but as another victim of my father's weakness and Patricia's manipulation. Do you know anything about your biological father? I asked her. She shook her head. Nothing. Patricia never mentioned him. The letter just said he wasn't in the picture. She twisted a napkin between her fingers. I don't even know if Madison is my real name. It's the name you've had your whole life, I said. That makes it real enough. She gave me a small, grateful smile. I keep thinking about all those times Dad, Charles, introduced me as his daughter, his heir, his legacy. All those times Patricia dressed me up and paraded me at company events. Her voice hardened. I was a prop, a living, breathing prop in their perfect family picture. I understood that feeling all too well, the sense of being used rather than loved. What will you do now? I asked. Madison sighed. I don't know. I can't go back to that house. Not after knowing what they did to you. She hesitated. I was thinking about going to stay with my aunt in Charleston for a while. Patricia's sister. She's different. Kinder. That sounds like a good idea, I said. Some distance might help. What about you? She asked. Will you stay in Savannah? I hadn't thought that far ahead. The house was mine now, according to my father. So was some stock in the company, a company I'd never been allowed to visit, much less work for, despite my business degree. I think I need to stay at least for now, I said, to settle Mom's affairs, to figure out what happens next. Madison nodded. That makes sense. She looked at me with a sudden intensity. Rachel, I want you to know I'm going to make this right, somehow. I don't know how yet, but I will. I wasn't sure what she meant, but the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. You don't owe me anything, Madison. Yes, I do, she insisted. Maybe not directly, but I benefited from what they did to you. Every advantage I had came at your expense. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. It's Patricia. Again. She's been calling nonstop. Are you going to answer? She shook her head. Not yet. I'm not ready to talk to her. She put the phone away. I should go, though. My friend will be wondering where I am. We stood up, the awkwardness returning now that our conversation was ending. Madison hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. A brief, tentative embrace that took me by surprise. Thank you, she whispered, for meeting me, for listening, for not hating me. I never hated you, I said, truthfully. I envied you. I resented you sometimes, but I never hated you. She pulled back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Can we stay in touch? Maybe talk again before I leave for Charleston? I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. After she left, I remained at the table, finishing my cold coffee and trying to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text. From Aunt Beth. How are you holding up? Need company? I texted back, just finished talking with Madison. Lot to process. Rain check on company? Of course, she replied. Here when you need me. I paid the bill and stepped out into the Savannah sunshine. The city looked different somehow. The same oak trees draped with Spanish moss, the same historic squares and cobblestone streets, but as if a filter had been removed, allowing me to see it all more clearly. For the first time in my life, I felt free, untethered from the lies that had defined me for so long. The truth, painful as it was, had set something loose inside me. I walked home slowly, enjoying the warm air on my skin, the sounds of the city around me. When I reached Mom's house, my house now, I sat on the porch swing, not ready to go inside just yet. From my purse, I took out the locket my father had given me. I opened it again, studying the tiny photograph of Eliza, my birth mother. She'd been beautiful, with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to look right into me. "I wish I'd known you," I whispered to her image. My phone rang, startling me. An unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Rachel Monroe?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Victor Donovan. I'm the CFO at Monroe Industries." He paused. "Your father asked me to call you." I stiffened. "Why?" "He'd like you to come to the office tomorrow morning. There are some matters regarding your inheritance from Margaret Monroe that need to be discussed." "My inheritance?" I repeated. "He mentioned something about stock." "Yes, among other things," Victor said. "Could you come in at 10? I hesitated. The thought of walking into Monroe Industries, the company that bore my name but had always been off-limits to me, was intimidating. But I was done hiding, done accepting less than I deserved. "I'll be there," I said firmly. "Excellent. I'll send you the address and details." After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, contemplating what this, meeting might entail. Then I went inside and headed straight for my closet. If I was going to face my father on his territory tomorrow, I needed to look the part. The next morning, I stood before the imposing glass tower of Monroe Industries in downtown Savannah, dressed in a tailored navy suit I'd splurged on after graduating business school, a suit I'd never had occasion to wear until now. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, my makeup minimal but polished. I wore my mother's locket around my neck, a talisman of sorts. "You can do this," I told myself, pushing through the revolving door into the marble-floored lobby. At the reception desk, I gave my name. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. News traveled fast in corporate circles too, apparently, but she maintained her, professional demeanor. "Mr. Donovan is expecting you, Ms. Monroe. 18th floor." In the elevator, I took deep breaths, centering myself. The doors opened onto a reception area decorated in muted grays and blues, the Monroe Industries logo prominently displayed on the wall. "Rachel," a voice said, and I turned to see a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair approaching with his hand extended. "Victor Donovan, thank you for coming." I shook his hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you for arranging this meeting." "Of course, if you'll follow me." He led me down a corridor lined with framed photographs, the company's history in images. I noticed my father in many of them, always looking confident and commanding. There were no pictures of me, of course, but, surprisingly, there were none of Madison either. Victor showed me into a conference room where 3 other people were already seated, 2 men and a woman, all in expensive suits, all watching me with curious eyes. And at the head of the table sat my father. He stood when I entered, an unexpected gesture of respect. "Rachel, thank you for coming." I nodded coolly, taking the seat Victor indicated, directly across from my father. Mr. Donovan said it was about Grandma Margaret's inheritance. My father exchanged glances with the others. "Yes, partly, but there's more we need to discuss." He gestured to the others around the table. "This is our legal team and our board secretary. What we're about to discuss requires witnesses." I tensed, suspicion flaring. "What exactly are we discussing?" My father slid a folder across the table to me. "These are the shares Margaret left you. 15% of Monroe Industries. It's a significant stake, larger than anyone else's except mine." I opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. The legal language was complex, but the numbers were clear enough. Grandma had indeed left me a substantial portion of the company. "There's something else," my father continued. He slid another folder toward me. "This is a proposal. I'd like you to consider joining the company, in an executive position." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me? You have a business degree," he said. "A good one. From what I understand, you've been working in marketing for that local firm, doing well there." I was speechless. How dare he? Suddenly take an interest in my career now, after ignoring my achievements for years? "Why?" I finally managed to ask. My father looked uncomfortable. "Because it's time to set things right. Because you're my daughter and a Monroe, and this company should have been part of your life all along. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. And it took Grandma's letter and a public scandal for you to realize. This? The lawyers shifted awkwardly in their seats. Victor cleared his throat. Perhaps, my father acknowledged. But the fact remains. You own 15% of this company now. You have a seat at the table if you want it. I stared at the second folder, not opening it yet. The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Everyone was watching me, waiting for my response. This feels convenient, I said finally, looking directly at my father. 2 days ago, you publicly disowned me. Today, you're offering me an executive position. What changed? The woman from the legal team, Melissa Hargrove, according to the nameplate in front of her, cleared her throat. If I may, Ms. Monroe, your grandmother's will was quite specific. The shares she left you come, with certain conditions. I turned to her, eyebrows raised. What kind of conditions? She glanced at my father, who nodded for her to continue. Margaret stipulated that her shares would only transfer to you if you were offered a position within the company commensurate with your qualifications. If that offer wasn't made within 1 week of the reading of her will, the shares would be placed in a trust with very specific voting instructions that would effectively block any major company decisions requiring shareholder approval. I couldn't help but smile. Grandma Margaret, even from beyond the grave, was forcing my father's hand. So this isn't about setting things right, I said to him. This is about complying with Grandma's wishes to avoid losing control of your company. My father shifted uncomfortably. The timing is dictated by the will, yes, but the sentiment is genuine, Rachel. Victor Donovan intervened smoothly. Perhaps we should focus on the proposal itself. Charles has suggested creating a new position, Director of Corporate Social Responsibility. Given your background in marketing and your unique perspective on the Monroe family, you'd be well-positioned to reshape the company's community engagement. I finally opened the second folder. Inside was a detailed job description, along with a compensation package that made my current salary look like pocket change. The role would give me significant influence over the company's charitable giving, community partnerships, and public image. It was, objectively, a good offer. A great offer, even. But the circumstances made it feel tainted. I'd like some time to consider this, I said, closing the folder. My father nodded. Of course, the lawyers will need your decision by Friday, per the terms of the will. He hesitated, then added, regardless of your decision about the position, the shares are yours. You're a significant owner of Monroe Industries now, Rachel. I gathered both folders and stood up. I'll let you know by Friday. Victor walked me back to the elevator, maintaining a respectful silence until we reached the lobby. As we waited for the doors to open, he said quietly, For what it's worth, Ms. Monroe, I worked with your grandmother for many years. She was an extraordinary woman, very forward-thinking. He smiled slightly, and very determined. Yes, she was, I agreed. She spoke of you often, he added, with great pride. The elevator arrived and I stepped inside. Thank you for telling me that, Mr. Donovan. As I walked out of the Monroe Industries building, my mind was spinning. The inheritance, the job offer, the manipulations from beyond the grave, it was almost too much to process. I needed advice, perspective from someone who wasn't entangled in the Monroe family drama. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had always been honest with me. Aunt Beth? Can we meet for lunch? I need to talk. An hour later, we sat at a small bistro near the riverfront. The folders from the meeting spread out between us on the table. Beth studied the documents carefully, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Margaret, you sly fox, she murmured, shaking her head in admiration. She set this up perfectly. What do you think I should do? I asked. Beth took off her glasses and looked at me intently. What do you want to do, Rachel? Forget the money. Forget Charles. Forget everything else. What do you want? I considered the question. What did I want? For years, all I'd wanted was acknowledgement from my father, a place in the family that bore my name. Now that it was being offered, under duress admittedly, I found myself uncertain. I don't know if I can work with him, I admitted, after everything that's happened. Then don't, Beth said simply. Take the shares, but decline the position. You have options now, Rachel. That's what Margaret wanted for you. Options. But the company will survive without you in that office, she finished. And if it doesn't, well, that's not your responsibility. I sipped my iced tea, considering her words. There's something else, I said. Something I've been thinking about since yesterday. What's that? Madison. She's so lost right now, Beth. Finding out she was adopted, that everything she believed about herself was a lie. I trailed off, remembering her devastated expression at the cafe. I know how that feels. Beth nodded. You've both been hurt by the same people, in different ways. Exactly. And I keep thinking about what Grandma Margaret would do in this situation. Beth smiled softly. She'd find a way to help without compromising her principles. That's what I want to do, I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. I want to use this inheritance, the money, the position, everything, to do something good. Something that would make Grandma proud. Like what? I wasn't entirely sure yet, but I could feel the beginnings of a plan forming. Something that honors the truth. Something that helps people who've been lied to, like Madison and me. Beth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. And, for what it's worth, I think Margaret would be very proud of you right now. That evening, I received a text from Madison. Leaving for Charleston tomorrow. Can we meet tonight? We arranged to meet at a quiet wine bar downtown. When I arrived, Madison was already there, looking tired, but somehow lighter than she had at the cafe. I talked to my aunt in Charleston, she said after we'd ordered. She's going to help me find information about my biological father, if he's still alive. That's good, I said. You deserve to know your history. She nodded, running her finger around the rim of her wine glass. I also talked to a therapist today. Just a preliminary consultation, but I think it's going to help. Sorting through all of this. I'm glad, Madison. She looked up at me. What about you? Are you doing okay? After everything? I hesitated, then decided to tell her about the meeting at Monroe Industries. As I explained the inheritance and the job offer, her eyes widened. 15%? She repeated. That's huge, Rachel. I know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. What are you going to do? About the job, I mean. I took a sip of my wine. I'm not sure yet, but I've been thinking a lot about what happens next, for both of us. What do you mean? Madison, we've both been lied to our entire lives. We've both had our identities shaped by other people's decisions, other people's deceptions. I leaned forward. What if we used this situation, the inheritance, the company connections, everything, to help others like us? She looked intrigued. How? I'm not entirely sure yet. Maybe a foundation that helps adoptees find their birth families, or something that provides counseling for people dealing with family secrets, family trauma. I shrugged. It's just an idea, but it feels right somehow. Madison was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she nodded slowly. I like that, she said. I really do. It's like taking something broken and making something good from it. Exactly. I smiled at her, surprised by how natural it felt. Would you want to be involved? If I pursue this? Her face lit up. Yes, absolutely yes. She hesitated. But what about the job at Monroe Industries? I thought about the conference room, about my father sitting at the head of the table, about the lawyers and their carefully worded documents. I think I'll take it, I said, surprising myself with the decision. But on my terms, with my vision for what the role should be. Madison raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said, and to the truth, however painful it might be. I clinked my glass against hers. To the truth. As we sat there, two women connected by lies but now bound by truth, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope, not just for myself, but for Madison too. For both of us to build something meaningful from the wreckage of our shared past. The next morning, I woke with newfound clarity. After my conversation with Madison, I'd stayed up late drafting a proposal, my counteroffer to my father and Monroe Industries. If they wanted me to join the company, it would be with purpose and autonomy, not as a token gesture to satisfy Grandma Margaret's will. I dressed carefully in a deep burgundy blouse and charcoal gray suit, slipped my mother's locket around my neck, and headed to Monroe Industries without calling ahead. The element of surprise seemed important somehow. The receptionist recognized me from the day before. Ms. Monroe, we weren't expecting you today. Is my father in? She checked. Her computer. Yes, but he has meetings all morning. That's fine, I said, already walking toward the elevator. He'll see me. When I reached the executive floor, my father's assistant, a young man with a carefully neutral expression, tried to intercept me. Ms. Monroe, you don't have an appointment. He'll want to hear what I have to say, I replied, moving past him toward the imposing double doors of the corner office. I knocked once firmly, then entered without waiting for a response. My father was seated behind his desk on the phone. He looked up in surprise, then quickly ended his call. Rachel, this is unexpected. I've made my decision, I said, setting my leather portfolio on his desk. But I have conditions. He gestured to the chair across from him. I'm listening. I sat down, maintaining eye contact. I'll accept the position of Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, but with expanded scope and authority. Expanded how? I opened my portfolio and slid a document across to him. I want to establish the Margaret Monroe Foundation as a separate entity under the Monroe Industries umbrella. It will focus on supporting people affected by family secrets, adoption, issues, and identity challenges. Full funding for 5 years, with me as executive director, reporting directly to the board, not to you. My father skimmed the document, his expression unreadable. This is ambitious. It's non-negotiable, I said firmly. Grandma Margaret left me those shares for a reason. I intend to honor her legacy by creating something meaningful. And if I say no, I smiled thinly. Then I exercise my rights as a shareholder in exactly the way Grandma's will specified. I believe your lawyers explained the implications. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never expected to see in his eyes. Respect. Perhaps even a hint of pride. You're very much like her, you know, he said quietly. Margaret. She never backed down either. Is that a yes? He nodded slowly. Yes. We'll need to work out the details, of course. Budget, structure, reporting lines. I've outlined those in the proposal, I said, gesturing to the document. I've done my homework, Dad. The foundation makes business sense, too. Tax advantages, public relations benefits, community goodwill. It's a win for everyone. My father leaned back in his chair. When can you start? Monday, I said. I need to give notice at my current job, and I want the weekend to prepare. Very well. He hesitated, then added, And Madison? I understand you two have been talking. We have, I confirmed. She's in Charleston right now, but when she returns, she'll be joining the foundation. If that's a problem for you, it's not, he interrupted. It's good that you've found common ground. An awkward silence fell between us. There was still so much unresolved, so many years of neglect and hurt that couldn't be erased by one business arrangement. This doesn't fix everything, I said finally. You know that, right? I know. He looked down at his hands. But it's a start, maybe. I stood up to leave, gathering my portfolio. A start, I agreed. Nothing more. As I turned to go, he called after me. Rachel, your mother, Eliza, she would have been proud of you too. I paused at the door, not looking back. Thank you for saying that. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I resigned from my marketing job, explaining to my surprised boss that I'd been offered a position I couldn't refuse. I spoke with Madison daily, sharing my plans for the Y Foundation, incorporating her ideas and suggestions. And I began the process of truly settling into my mother's house, making it mine, sorting through decades of memories, deciding what to keep and what to let go. On Friday evening, Aunt Beth came over with a bottle of champagne. To celebrate your new venture, she said, popping the cork in my kitchen. It hasn't even started yet, I laughed. Doesn't matter. This moment, right now, is worth celebrating. She handed me a glass. You stood up for yourself, Rachel. You claimed your place without compromising who you are. That's no small thing. We took our glasses to the back porch, sitting on the swing as twilight descended over Savannah. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine from the garden. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? I asked. Working with him, I mean. Beth considered the question. I think you're doing the right thing for you. That's what matters. Madison's coming back next week, I said. She's going to stay here in the guest room until she finds her own place. Is that weird? After everything? Beth smiled. Life is weird, honey. You two finding a way forward together? That's a kind of grace. Don't question it too much. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. Have you spoken to Patricia? Beth asked eventually. I shook my head. No, I don't think she wants to speak to me, and honestly, I have nothing to say to her. Probably for the best, Beth agreed. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Later that night, after Beth had gone, I sat alone in what had been my mother's study, now gradually becoming mine. On the desk was a framed photograph of Grandma Margaret, taken on her 70th birthday. She was smiling directly at the camera, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. "I'm trying to make you proud," I told her image. "I hope I'm on the right track." My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Found some information about my biological father. Will tell you when I get back. Hope you're doing okay." I texted back. "Looking forward to having you here. Your room is ready whenever you are." The weekend passed quietly. I prepared for my first day at Monroe Industries, reviewing company materials, familiarizing myself with their current charitable initiatives, minimal and uninspired, and refining my vision for the Margaret Monroe Foundation. On Sunday night, I stood in front of my closet, selecting my outfit for the next day. My fingers brushed against the plain black dress I'd worn to Mom's funeral. Was it really only a week ago? It felt like a lifetime had passed since that day. I pushed the dress aside, opting instead for a confident red suit that Grandma Margaret had always loved. "Red makes a statement," she'd told me once. "Wear it when you need to be heard." Tomorrow, I needed to be heard. The next morning, I walked into Monroe Industries with my head high, nodding to the receptionist who now greeted me by name. In the elevator, several employees glanced at me curiously. Word had obviously spread about the newest Monroe to join the company. Victor Donovan met me on the executive floor. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe. Your office is ready." He led me down a corridor to a corner office with windows overlooking the Savannah River. "Charles thought you might appreciate the view." The office was spacious and tastefully furnished, but what caught my eye was what hung on the wall behind the desk, a portrait of Grandma Margaret in her prime, elegant and formidable in a blue suit, her expression both warm and determined. "He had it brought over from the house on Friday," Victor explained. "Said it belonged here now." I approached the portrait, studying the familiar face that had always represented safety and love to me. "Thank you for showing me in, Mr. Donovan." "Victor, please," he smiled. "The board meeting starts at 10. They're expecting you to present your, foundation proposal." After he left, I set my briefcase on the desk and took a moment to absorb my surroundings. This office, this company, this name, all things that should have been part of my birthright, but had been denied to me for years. Now I was here, not because my father had finally acknowledged me, but because Grandma Margaret had forced his hand from beyond the grave. There was a certain poetry to that, and I couldn't help but smile. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find my father standing in the doorway, watching me with an uncertain expression. "The portrait suits the space," he said. "It does," I agreed. "Thank you for that." He entered the office, hands in his pockets, a rare display of awkwardness from a man usually so assured. "The board is curious about your proposal. Some are concerned about the budget allocation. I'm prepared to address their concerns," I said confidently. He nodded. "I'm sure you are." He hesitated, then added, "Rachel, I want you to know, regardless of how this goes, the foundation is approved. I've already signed off on it." I looked at him in surprise. "You have?" "Yes. Whatever the board says, this is happening." He met my eyes directly. "I owe you that much, at least." It wasn't an apology, not explicitly, but coming from my father, it was significant. "Thank you," I said simply. He glanced at his watch. "We should head to the boardroom. Are you ready?" I looked at Grandma Margaret's portrait, drawing strength from her painted gaze, then picked up my portfolio. "I'm ready." As we walked together down the corridor, not quite together, but not entirely separate either, I felt a strange sense of coming full circle. A week ago, I had stood in a church, publicly humiliated and disowned. Today, I was walking into a boardroom to present my vision for a foundation that would help others like Madison and me, people whose lives had been shaped by secrets and lies. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that. But it was something else, something that Grandma Margaret might have called moving forward with dignity. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated community center in downtown Savannah, preparing to officially launch the Margaret Monroe Foundation. Behind me, a large banner displayed our logo, a stylized open book representing truth and new beginnings, and our tagline, "Your story matters." The room was filled with community partners, potential grant recipients, media representatives, and Monroe Industries employees. In the front row sat Madison, elegant in a navy suit, her hair cut into a stylish bob that framed her face. Beside her was Aunt Beth, beaming with pride. My father sat, a few seats away, Patricia noticeably absent. Their divorce had been finalized a month earlier. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "Thank you all for being here today as we launch an initiative very close to my heart." I explained the Foundation's mission: to support individuals and families dealing with adoption, family secrets, and identity challenges. We would provide counseling services, legal assistance for adoptees seeking information, educational resources, and community support groups. The foundation is named for my grandmother, Margaret Monroe, who understood that truth, however difficult, is ultimately liberating. She believed that knowing your story, your real story, is fundamental to knowing yourself. As I spoke, I could feel Grandma, Margaret's presence, almost as tangible as the portrait that now hung in my office. I could almost hear her saying, "Stand tall, Rachel. Speak your truth." Many of you know that the inspiration for this foundation came from personal experience, I continued. 6 months ago at my mother's funeral, I learned that much of what I'd been told about my place in the Monroe family was a lie. I also discovered that my stepsister Madison had been lied to as well, about her adoption, about her history. I glanced at Madison, who gave me an encouraging nod. We could have let those lies define us, divide us. Instead, we chose to transform that pain into purpose. I gestured to Madison. "I'd like to invite our foundation's deputy director, Madison Pierce, to share more about our first initiatives." Madison joined me at the podium, and as she began to speak about our plans for a counseling center and legal aid program, I stepped back, watching her with a mixture of pride and affection. The past 6 months had transformed our relationship. Living together in Mom's house, which we now jokingly called Redemption Cottage, we'd moved from cautious allies to genuine friends. Late-night conversations over wine, shared meals, occasional tears, and unexpected laughter had forged a bond neither of us had anticipated. Madison had discovered that her biological father had died years ago, but she'd connected with his sister, her aunt, who had welcomed her with open arms, sharing family photos and stories. It hadn't erased the pain of Patricia's deception, but it had given Madison something she desperately needed: a sense of where she came from. Meanwhile, I had settled into my role at Monroe Industries with surprising ease. The company respected my abilities, and the foundation was gaining recognition for its innovative approach to family support services. My relationship with my father remained complicated: civil, professional, occasionally warming, but always with the shadows of the past between us. After the presentation, as guests mingled and enjoyed refreshments, my father approached me. "That was impressive," he said. "Both of you." "Thank you," I replied. "We've worked hard on this." He nodded, looking around at the crowded room. Margaret would have loved this, seeing her name associated with something meaningful, something that helps people. Yes, she would have. An awkward silence fell between us, still a common occurrence despite months of working in the same company. "I saw the quarterly reports for the foundation," he said finally. "The counseling services are already at capacity. We're hiring 2 more therapists next month," I told him, "and expanding the legal aid program." He looked at me with that same expression I'd seen in his office 6 months ago, a mixture of respect and something like regret. "You've accomplished more in half a year than most people do in a decade, Rachel." Before I could respond, Madison joined us, champagne flute in hand. "The reporter from the Savannah Morning News wants to interview us both," she said to me. Then, with a polite nod to my father, Charles. Their relationship had evolved too, from the devoted daddy's girl dynamic to something much more distant and formal. Madison had been deeply hurt by his deception, perhaps even more than I had been. While I had grown up with his rejection, she had grown up with his love, only to discover it was conditional, manipulated by Patricia, and built on lies. "I'll let you get to your interview," my father said, stepping back. "Congratulations." Again. As he walked away, Madison linked her arm through mine. "You okay?" I nodded. "Fine. Just thinking about how much has changed." "Tell me about it," she said with a wry smile. "A year ago, I thought I was Charles Monroe's biological daughter and heir apparent. Now I'm working for a foundation with the stepsister I used to ignore, helping people untangle family secrets." She shook her head. "Life is strange." "But good?" I asked. "Getting there," she said. "Definitely getting there." After the event, Madison headed to a dinner date with a lawyer she'd recently started seeing, while I returned to the house alone. I kicked off my heels in the foyer and padded into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of wine before stepping out onto the back porch. The evening was cool but pleasant, the garden lush with early fall blooms. I sat on the swing, feeling the weight of the day, the culmination of months of work, planning, and emotional processing. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Beth. "So proud of you today." Margaret would have been too. I smiled, typing back a thank you, then set the phone aside and closed my eyes, listening to the night sounds of Savannah. Distant traffic, cicadas, the occasional barking dog. The sound of the doorbell startled me. Setting down my wine, I went to answer it, wondering if Madison had forgotten her key. But it wasn't Madison at the door. It was a woman I'd never seen before, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. "Rachel Monroe?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Claire Bennett. I was a friend of your mother's." Eliza stared at her, speechless. In the 29 years since my birth mother's death, I'd never met anyone who had known her personally. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," Claire continued. "I saw the article about your foundation in the paper today, with your picture. You look so much like her." Her voice caught. I couldn't believe it. Still stunned, I stepped back. "Please, come in." I led her to the living room, my mind racing. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, clasping and unclasping her hands nervously. "I moved away from Savannah right after Eliza died," she explained. "It was too painful to stay. But I moved back last year to care for my mother." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album. "I thought you might want to see these." With trembling hands, I took the album and opened it. There on the first page was my birth mother, young, laughing, her hair blowing in the wind at what looked like Tybee Island. The resemblance between us was unmistakable. "We were best friends in high school," Claire said softly. "And after. I was there when she met your father, when she found out she was pregnant with you, when they got married." I turned the pages. Slowly, drinking in each image of the mother I'd never known. Eliza at a party, Eliza in a graduation gown, Eliza in a simple wedding dress beside a younger version of my father, looking happier than I'd ever seen him. "She was so excited about you," Claire continued. "Had your nursery all ready 3 months before you were due. Painted it yellow because she didn't want to know if you were a boy. Or girl, wanted it to be a surprise." Tears filled my eyes. "What was she like?" Claire smiled, her own eyes glistening. "Stubborn, smart, loyal to a fault. She could make anyone laugh, even on their worst day." She pointed to a photo of Eliza standing in front of a small bookstore. "She worked here while taking night classes at the community college, had plans to become a teacher eventually." "The accident," I said hesitantly. Did you?" "I wasn't there," Claire said gently, "but I came right away to the hospital. Your father was devastated, Rachel. Truly devastated. I want you to know that." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "After the funeral, I tried to stay in touch, to be part of your life. But then your father met Patricia and—" She trailed off. "Things changed. I moved to Atlanta. Lost contact." She looked at me apologetically. "I should have tried harder. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," I said, finding my voice. "Nothing about this situation is your fault." We talked for hours, Claire sharing stories about Eliza, her favorite books, her dream of traveling to Italy, her habit of singing off-key in the car. Each detail was a precious gift, filling in the blank spaces of my history. "She would be so proud of you," Claire said as she prepared to leave. "This foundation, what you're doing for others, it's exactly the kind of thing she would have supported." She handed me the photo album. "This is yours now." I made copies of the ones I wanted to keep. I clutched it to my chest. "Thank you. For this, for coming here, for everything." After Claire left, I sat on the porch swing again, the photo album open on my lap, tracing my finger over Eliza's smiling face. For the first time in my life, I felt complete, not because all the wounds had healed or all the questions had been answered, but because I finally had the truth, my whole truth. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the cemetery where both my mothers were. Buried, Evelyn, who had raised me, and Eliza, who had given birth to me. I placed flowers on both graves, then sat on a nearby bench, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Morning, bringing bagels and coffee to the office. Board meeting at 10 to discuss next quarter's initiatives. You ready?" I smiled, typing back, "Ready." See you. There. As I stood to leave, I touched Eliza's headstone one last time. I found my way, I whispered. It took a while, but I found my way. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of Grandma Margaret's letter, the truth it had revealed, the upheaval it had caused, and ultimately, the healing it had made possible. The truth had indeed set me free, just as she had known it would. At the foundation office later that morning, as Madison and I prepared for the board meeting, she noticed the new frame on my desk, a photo of Eliza that Claire had given me. She has your smile, Madison observed. Claire says I have hers, I replied. Funny how that works. Madison squeezed my shoulder. Ready to go change some more lives today? I nodded, gathering my materials for the meeting. Absolutely. As we walked to the boardroom together, I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, from humiliation at my mother's funeral to the creation of something meaningful and lasting. From a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own family to building a new kind of family, based not on blood or legal ties, but on shared truth and mutual respect. It wasn't a perfect ending. My father and I would probably never have the relationship I'd longed for as a child. Patricia remained distant and resentful. Some wounds were too deep to fully heal, but it was a good ending, better than I could have imagined on that rainy day in the church when my world had fallen apart. Because sometimes, when the truth finally emerges, it doesn't just expose lies. It creates space for something new to grow, something authentic, something strong, something real. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any inheritance, any name, any false acceptance could ever be. The truth, as Grandma Margaret always said, arrives in its own time. And when it does, it changes everything.